More fair. We will give everyone a couple more minutes to join before we get started. All right, let's get started. Hello, everyone. I would like to welcome everyone to our webinar, Strategies for Making Your Hiring Process More Fair. Thanks for being here. What I'd like to do is run through a high-level overview of the agenda, welcome everybody, give some brief introductions, have a wonderful and insightful panel discussion. We'll have a little bit of audience Q&A, and then we'll end with our closing. Before I get started with introductions, I'd love to introduce myself. My name is Ken Oliver. I'm the Executive Director of the Checkr Foundation and the Vice President of Corporate Social Responsibility for Checkr.com. Great to be here. An honor and pleasure to have these esteemed guests. I would love for everyone to give their name, their title, a little bit about their background on your business and your industry, and where you're calling in from. Um, I guess I'll pass it off to my friend and colleague, Rayhana. Why don't you go first?
Thanks so much, Ken. Happy to be here. My name is Rahana Lorando, and I'm the co-founder of the Overmar Group and the Director of Fair Chance Implementation over at that organization. We are going through a rebrand right now, so there'll be more information from us and what we're up to soon. I'm calling in from Atlanta, Georgia, and I have about 10 years of experience in workforce tech, and five of those years have been spent directly on building fair chance hiring practices from the ground up, both working with internal businesses and community-based organizations to build strong strategic practices for fair chance hiring for any business in any industry. So I'm really excited to be here and share, and I'll pass that back to Ken.
Okay, thanks for that, Rayhana. Ashley?
Yeah, so my name is Ashley Chain. I'm the Director of People and Operations at Process Street, calling in from Houston, Texas. So we have people from all over in the chat, so it's exciting. A little bit about me. I started my career as a recruiter and did that for a few years, and then decided I wanted to learn more about the operational side of HR. And I moved into an operations role at a startup and was able to create the recruiting process and hiring process from scratch there. And I learned a lot about fair and inclusive hiring and how intentional it needs to be. It's not something that just happens, right? So now I combine the two at Process Street. And a little bit about Process Street itself. So we are a no-code workflow automation tool. And our mission is to make work fun, fast, and faultless for teams everywhere. One of our biggest use cases is actually employee onboarding. And so, we have used Process Street here at Process Street to promote an inclusive and fair hiring and onboarding process. Since I've been here, we've grown from about 20 to around 50 people. We are a 100% remote, fully distributed team. So that means one, we don't have any offices. And two, I have wonderful colleagues from all over the world. But it also presents unique challenges, right, around hiring and making sure that we're intentional in creating a fair and inclusive process. So I'm excited to be here and share a little bit about what we do here and to learn from fellow panelists.
Thank you, Ashley. Stephanie, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, my name is Stephanie Hammerwold. I'm the Director of HR at Arcules, a tech company in Irvine, which is in Southern California. And I'm also really excited watching all the people that are putting in the chat where they're calling in from. And really cool to see even people that are outside the U.S., so in Canada and Senegal and whatnot. But I have been the Director of HR for about 5 years at Arcules since the beginning. In my free time, I do a lot of volunteer work and advocacy with currently and formerly incarcerated people, currently a volunteer with the California Coalition for Women Prisoners. So a big part of my work is creating that bridge between business leaders, HR professionals, and then the reentry community to help change policy and to help get jobs for a very deserving group of people.
Thank you for that, Stephanie. JD.
Yeah, so grateful to be here. I'm JD Conway, Head of Talent Acquisition from BambooHR. I'm calling in from the Salt Lake City area, and I am really passionate about empowering HR leaders and executives to focus on the humanization of human capital. And I'm drawing from about 15 years of experience. I've done this at BambooHR actually since about 2015, so quite a long period of time. I've been able to see the growth and structure of BambooHR grow from about, I think I joined about employee 120 or so, and we're about 1,200 at this point. So it's hard to keep track at this point. A lot of good growth. I'm really invested again in creating really good hiring processes that are fair to all involved, and creating training to do that and help build more understanding and more inclusion in the hiring process itself. So this is why I'm so grateful to be here today.
Thanks for that, JD. I'm really excited to hear all of the insights that the panel are going to drop today. Why don't we jump right into the discussion? Just as a brief reminder, we will be recording this session today and sending out the content after the webinar is over with. So Ashley, I'd like to start with you and hear a little bit about how we can use technology to reduce bias from the interview process.
Sure. So there's a lot of great technology out there. Specifically here at Process Street, we use a few different technologies to help reduce bias. One of those is a gender decoding software that we use for our job descriptions. And this is kind of a no-brainer, right? We've learned that some language in our job descriptions actually discourages women and people from other groups to apply. And so in order to avoid using that language, we use this gender decoding site where we can literally just paste our job description. It highlights the language that either excludes specific groups, could be discouraging to certain groups, and offers the changes that we can make. So that's one way that we've used technology. Also in our sourcing efforts. So like I said before, we are a smaller team here, and so we don't have dedicated sourcers. And so we use job boards that are dedicated to certain underrepresented groups. So we can list our open positions, and we can be sure that we are putting in the effort to reach the full spectrum of candidates that we'd like to work with. Rather than posting to, let's say, the more obvious places like LinkedIn, we're kind of probably drawing from a smaller pool of candidates that's not as diverse as it could be. And so we also use our ATS, our applicant tracking system, to help promote inclusion and reduce bias. They have recently implemented, 2 ways that they promote inclusion. And so candidates can record how to pronounce their name at the application or at the time that they submit their application, and also include their pronouns, which we found to be really helpful and very well received from both the interviewers and the candidates as well. And then reducing bias. So at the outset of opening a requisition, we work with hiring managers to define, our ideal candidate, the key decision criteria for a role up front. And then we put all of that into the scorecards that are in our ATS. So each interviewer, we take the specific skills that we're looking for the role. We come up with interview questions to uncover those specific skills and put all of that into a scorecard. So our interviewers are using the same questions and scorecards for each candidate that they are interviewing. And that keeps things more structured, less likely that any unconscious bias could creep in there and come into play in the interview process.
Thanks for that, Ashley. That's amazing. JD, I'd love to hear from you a little bit about how you all are using technology to reduce bias in the application and interview process.
Yeah, first I got to jump in and say I love what they're doing over there. Ashley, I remember us just talking about this a little bit right before we were able to join, and I hope people were paying close attention or able to go back to that and listen to some of those ideas. It doesn't matter how large your company is, you can put a lot of things together that are really impactful. One of the things that I feel very passionate about is utilizing kickoff forms, very specific ones to address barriers to entry for jobs right off the bat. For example, you may have hiring managers that will often say, we need somebody with this particular background, and we should question that and get to the point where we can tear down as many barriers as possible. So again, we can just go right down to the knowledge, skills, and abilities, the bare bones absolute needs for something. And I think that opens the gates to more people, and it helps managers mentally get to that place as well. Very often we see hiring managers that might look for duplications of their background, and we have to help them get there. So we have that built in our kickoff forms. We have prompts to break some of those barriers down, and to make sure that on a regular basis, you may see there's very few specific educational requirements, because we know that people can get to a particular set of knowledge, skills, and abilities through many areas and many means. We also have learning management systems that we're incorporating into our hiring manager training. Now, I should tell everyone that hiring managers at BambooHR go through about 3.5 hours over a 2-week period of interview training with myself and with other people involved to really talk about the things that are absolutely necessary to talk about how we ask good questions, what are good templates, how to build scorecards, including a whole section with our scorecards that are built to address biases themselves. And there's something that we incorporate called the cognitive reflection test. It's a really good, developed by a professor at Yale probably 20 years ago. It's a really good way for people to stop and reflect. It's these 3 questions, and it helps everyone, no matter how much interview experience they've had. And I always tell people, it doesn't matter how long you've been driving per se. You might be a great driver or a bad driver. So let's all just equalize ourselves to wherever we're at. And we can use something like this cognitive reflection test to help people take a look at, am I prone to system 1 thinking or automatic reactions? That's from a book by Daniel Kahneman. And system 1 thinking is something that happens with our instincts and how we immediately judge a situation or people. And so we stop and take a lot of time to address that. I highly recommend doing an exercise like this. And if the audience would like to take a look at that and incorporate that, we even talk about how areas of our brain make or have an effect on our decision making, right? How our amygdalas, our fight or flight syndrome, can affect how we assess somebody. So it really helps people center and get to a place where we can look at the whole picture and take unconscious biases and try to bring them into conscientiousness.
Thanks for that. I appreciate that. Very insightful information from a psychological perspective. Stephanie, I'd like to turn to you a little bit and ask a little bit about Fair Chance and how Fair Chance hiring basics and how it impacts retention, performance, and productivity in the process.
Yeah, and I think, and I apologize, as soon as this webinar started up, the street work started up again outside my apartment. So I'm hoping you're not getting too much background noise. But I think it's really important, especially in the super competitive job market, that we're looking at ways to tap all these different pools that are often overlooked. And we're talking about fair chance hiring and looking at people that are formerly incarcerated that may have records. One of my first HR jobs was with a HR director who said, if somebody has checked off that box on the application, throw them in the reject pile, they can get a job elsewhere and get experience elsewhere. And we were hiring warehouse workers for minimum wage. So we were entry level, we were elsewhere. And that didn't make a whole lot of sense to me. And I was volunteering in the women's jail at the time that I was working at that job, and got a very different perspective on how hard it is for people when they get out. And so one of the things, if we're looking at some of these different pools that normally have a harder time finding jobs, like the formerly incarcerated, they tend to be very loyal employees because they know how hard it is to find a job. They're not in a position where they can just find anything. So I've hired a number of people through the course of my HR career that I find out later on have backgrounds, and they're some of my most hardworking and loyal employees. And often for them too, getting that leg up and getting that stable income is what they need, not to go back to what they did before, because they're able to afford a place to live. They're able to afford groceries. They're able to provide for their family. And to do all those things and become a healthy member of society. So there's a lot of benefit to being a part of that person's journey back into being a contributing member of their community. And I'd also say it's really important for us as HR leaders, as business leaders, to put ourselves out there as people who embrace fair chance hiring. I put it on my LinkedIn profile. So if a candidate's going to interview with me and they see that, they know that it says HR professional and fair chance hiring advocate. They can look at my work history and my volunteer experience in there and see that I'm friendly to hiring people with backgrounds. Because there's been a number of times in my career too where somebody comes forward when they, we make the offer, set out the background check forms, and I get that nervous phone call saying, I am really nervous about saying this, but when you run the background check, here's what's going to come up. And 9 times out of 10, it's something that has no bearing on the job that I'm hiring them for. And so it doesn't matter. And, often too, I've hired people and they've had maybe a couple years of solid work experience. Like there's no reason to use that as an exclusionary factor. And so I think those things that immediately builds loyalty with that employee when you show them you're on their side and you want to be a part of their success. And that you treat them no different than any other employee as well. So I'd say put that out there, that, you know, that's a huge step for the business community and for us as leaders to be telling people that we are open to fair chance hiring. Because that helps attract those candidates. And, you know, when you think about it, about a third of the adult population in the US has some kind of criminal record. And if right now, I know all of you, if you're in HR right now, you're losing sleep over not being able to fill those open headcount, no matter what industry you're in. So this is a really good pool of people to tap into that does, you know, not only fills your openings, but really helps to reduce recidivism. It has like big ripples that, you know, you'll potentially affect.
Appreciate that, Stephanie, and those key components you gave in that narrative. Rehana, I'd like to turn to you. I know that you had opportunity as a former Fair Chance manager to grow a Fair Chance program organically. So I'm really interested, and I'm sure the audience is interested in hearing about some of the things you experience when it comes to retention and performance and productivity, and what it was like building that culture inside of a company.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Ken. And I will say I really appreciate that all of my fellow panelists have started with the work that the employer has to do, right? I think a lot of times with this talent pool, we're hyper focused on how can the talent skill up? How can the talent be prepared? How can the talent do this, that, and the other? When actually there are more barriers on our end as the employer side and more tweaks to the systems that we need to make as the first level of Fair Chance basics. Most of this talent pool are going to be, if not ready to work at the level that you're looking for right now, ready to ramp up very, very quickly. And what we really need to work on is opening up that accessibility for that to happen. So I really appreciated the grounding tips that everyone has given there. And something that Stephanie mentioned in terms of this overlooked talent pool being extremely loyal, just to really make that clear, that translates to retention. We're talking folks who are engaged and who are staying longer than the base populations of most businesses. That's statistically speaking the case, and often are going to outperform, if not perform on par with your base population. So those are all kind of Fair Chance basic reasons why every employer should be looking into this and why we should start with ourselves, right? But in terms of building something from the ground up organically, I think a lot of it honestly has already been mentioned in the first questions around how do you conduct a competency or skills-based assessment of skills. Maybe that's talent has the skills that you need that they've acquired in an untraditional way. How do you create something like a scorecard to be able to assess that fairly so that you're lowering the barrier but not the bar? Additionally, what are types of things that you can do to remove unconscious bias, like removing that box, which is legally required in about 35 states now due to ban the box efforts? How do you kind of anonymize your resume pool so people are making it through? The same instances that are hurting marginalized talent, like people of color, women, etc., are doubled and tripled down when it comes to a record. Black women with criminal records have the highest unemployment rate of any other demographic. So we can see how these types of tactics are so important for talent with records. In terms of when we think about performance and productivity, again, making sure that you're hiring the right person for the role who is skilled up or you've tested for their ability to ramp is super important. Sometimes that person is going to be a person with a record. So are you still having a rigorous interview process where you're not overemphasizing the record and putting the right people in the role? That's the biggest thing that you can do. The second thing that I would suggest is managerial support in the form of reasonable accommodation. So if someone is on parole or probation, what types of scaffolding do they need to be successful? Similarly to how you'd look at maternity or paternity leave or disability leave. And the third thing, I think the most important thing, is culture shifting. How are you creating a culture of belonging so that talent doesn't feel isolated, doesn't feel alone, doesn't feel othered or like an experiment, and you're really creating a place where you can find incredible talent that happens to have a criminal record to join your workforce and be part of a broader community. I think that if you don't nail that part, it doesn't matter how high their performance metrics are, it doesn't matter how great your interview process is. If you don't build that culture of belonging, you're not going to be able to retain talent long term. So those are the places where I'd start.
Wow, thanks for that, Rayhana. And talking about belonging, that's a great segue into my next question. And one of my favorite topics is belonging and inclusion. And so for that question, I'll turn to you, Stephanie, first this time, and share with us a few of your ideas on how to advance inclusion during the onboarding process once a person is hired.
Yeah, and I think if you're doing your work to make sure that your staff is diverse, you have a lot of people involved in the onboarding process. Especially now, I work for a company where we're mostly remote. We have our office available if people want to collaborate or whatnot, but most of the time we're onboarding people via Zoom and remotely. So we want to make sure that they connect with as many different kinds of people that are a good cross section of our work culture, to help them feel connected into that. And especially if you're focusing on hiring groups that are underrepresented in your industry. I work in tech, and women, especially women of color, are very underrepresented in our ranks in the industry. And so it's good to have a lot of different people involved in that onboarding process to make sure people are checking in, to really create that open door. I always like to say, HR, when we get the reputation of being pro company, for me, that means the people are the company. So I'm very pro employee in my approach and want to create that open door so that people are struggling in the first few weeks. If they feel a little lost out there, when they log in from home and go, what am I supposed to be doing? I want them to be okay reaching out to somebody from my team and saying, hey, I feel a little lost out here, and that we aren't going to judge them for that. One thing we've started doing as well is we're doing entrance interviews. We talk a lot about exit interviews, but within the first, about 2 weeks in, somebody from the HR team reaches out and does a pretty extensive interview with the new hire, to make sure that they're feeling comfortable. And if you're in a position where you're hiring people that are, like formerly incarcerated folks, or they're recently released and they may be struggling with the kind of culture shift of being in the institution where people tell them, this is when you eat, this is when you go to the bathroom, this is when you do everything, to being in a workplace where there's a little bit more freedom, even though you do have a lot of parameters around when you work. It's good to kind of create that relationship with that person so that they speak up and you can kind of support them with their individual needs. And again, if you've done your work and they know that you're very open, or even if you do those subtle things about like putting a rainbow flag sticker on your laptop so that people know that you're a LGBTQ plus friendly employer, those little things go a long way to making sure somebody speaks up, so that when an issue does come up or when they are struggling, you can figure out how to accommodate that. And I really liked what you said, Rihanna, about how you kind of take that, accommodate, the same way that you would accommodate pregnancy. Look at all these people that you're hiring that are differently situated, and figure out how do you adapt your workplace to meet their needs. Like with parole and probation, there's often these requirements. You have to check in at the parole office at 4:30 p.m. and they don't care that your shift doesn't end until 5. And you may have an employer who says, sorry, your shift ends at 5, we can't be flexible. But helping that person, because the sooner that they meet all those requirements, they got off parole or probation, and they become a full-fledged member of society without all those strings attached, to exist. So I think those are kind of a lot of important things. It's really about creating that open door and being there to kind of meet people where they are and kind of building an individualized plan around that.
Thanks for that, Stephanie. It was very thoughtful, your answers, and very informative too. Rayhana, I'd like to turn back to you briefly to talk a little bit about the onboarding process, and how we can maximize inclusion.
Sure, and I will keep it brief on this one because I think Stephanie covered a lot of really great stuff. And one area that I think is important to think about is if you are in a process in your organization where you are running background checks, and hopefully you're following EEOC guidance to do a nature time nature test. So what's the nature of the charge? What's the time that's passed? What's the nature of the role that you conduct after a conditional offer has been given to the talent? And then you go forward with that hire. It's super important, both legally speaking and culturally, to understand that sharing the contents of that record is not okay to do without the consent of the talent. And so I think that, especially if you're new to fair chance hiring and you're trying to shift your workplace culture to be open to having folks with conviction histories on your teams, you probably are going to come up against some instances of people without records wanting to know more than they have a right to know about who's being hired, what is on their record, and kind of having some fear that you need to navigate in a way that supports the talent, right? So how do you create space like office hours where people can come in and talk about what they're thinking about while still protecting the talent with records to say, you know what, I might have a real personal identity wrapped up in the time that I spent incarcerated, and I want to tell my story, and I want people to learn, and I want people to know me in that way, and that could be my choice to do so. But I've also hired people who have said, you know what, that was my past, I just want to be an employee here, I want to move forward with my life, and that also is totally acceptable. So I think that that's something in the onboarding process is super important to get clear both legally and culturally on how you're going to navigate infusing a practice of hiring talent with records into your organization, and what that equity and fairness looks like, and what that confidentiality with the open door and the belonging to create a safe place for people to tell their stories and be well received, but that's really their choice.
Yeah, thank you for that, Rayhana. Ashley, do you have any insight that you'd like to um, put down on us about inclusion in the onboarding process and how you guys approach it there?
Yes. So, like I said, we are a 100% remote company. And that was even before the pandemic. We always have been, always will be 100% remote. And so that can inherently make it harder to feel included or connected to your coworkers, especially as a new hire. We can't pass each other in the hall and kind of have that water cooler talk. So we have to kind of create it in a remote virtual environment. And so a lot of what we've done here is to ask our new hires to share about themselves. Whatever they're comfortable, we give them some prompts before they start. We do like some silly questions, like what's a fun fact about you? Ask me about XYZ. And we share this. So we are Process Street, and our new hire Slack channel is New on the Street. We're very proud of that silly name. And so we share these questions and answers there, and then encourage our employees to interact with those. So, I also love tacos, or wow, you like to hike with your partner. Tell me about that. And, just kind of creating that welcoming environment, whether it is something that they share or something that makes them different. And it's something that the new hire is comfortable sharing. And so we do one of those on their first day, at the end of their first week as well, have them create an About Me page about themselves. And they can look at all of the ones that their fellow colleagues have created too, and what they're comfortable sharing, just kind of learning more about them, their hobbies or interests outside of work. All of those things kind of create an inclusive environment, make you feel more welcoming, make you feel like, oh, this person shared something about themselves, I can then share this about myself, and I feel comfortable doing that. But none of it is forced. It's all, what they feel comfortable sharing and letting their fellow employees know about them. And then we also do a 60-day onboarding survey. So as we all know, as HR leaders, onboarding isn't, one day or a week or even a month. It's a process. And so 60 days, we felt you're not so new that you, kind of don't know what's going on still, but you are far enough removed from the process that you kind of can reflect on it without kind of forgetting kind of what onboarding was, right? So at 60 days, we send out a survey. Some of the questions are specifically focused on inclusion. And those are, so I feel my unique background and identity are valued at Process Street. I feel a sense of belonging at Process Street, and I feel respected by my colleagues. And so these are very intentional questions that we ask, so that we can kind of gauge how we're doing, right? We think that everything that we've implemented, we've done so with the intent for people to feel more included and to feel more welcomed, but are we really doing a good job? We only know if we get the feedback on that. And lastly, we do have a flexible work environment here. So we don't have set hours. We have unlimited PTO. And so those kind of benefits that we have of working here also promote an inclusive work environment. Like my fellow panelists were saying earlier, someone maybe needs to meet with their parole officer or whatever they need to do. They don't need to, take that time off and feel uncomfortable about it. Their time is their time. So.
Appreciate that, Ashley. Very progressive things you guys are doing over there, and really applaud you for that work. JD, I know it's hard to follow all of that brilliance that came before you with that answer, but we're going to give you a shot. JD, tell us about what you're doing over there at Bamboo to make sure that the onboarding process is inclusive.
It's also hard just to hold back and not be like, yes, that the entire time, right? So, I really love some of the things that have been said, and I want to incorporate some of my comments with what has been said in the hopes that even to this comment, I see a comment by a William in the chat about, so often the perception of HR is that HR's people say that HR is not their friend. Well, that's what I love about webinars like these, right? There are enough people that want to change that perception, that want to make workplaces safe, full of belonging, make sure we are really being thoughtful about what reasonable accommodation we can all make. How can we build workplaces that can facilitate belonging together and building relationships? So I really love what's happening in the industry right now. And for those of you who are on this webinar today, obviously you care enough about this topic that I hope that you are pushing for that at your organizations, and that you are finding others that feel the same way, so that way you can build that at organizations going forward. So sorry if that was too much of an aside, but I get pretty passionate about this. So some of these things that Ashley just addressed were ideas of how you can structure things, right? There's still shifts on some jobs and whatnot, but anything you can do to change what I call job structure architectures to facilitate some of these things happening would be great. As far as onboarding in specificity, BambooHR has part of our system has, prompt questions that are very innocuous, get to know you kinds of questions, like where's your favorite place to vacation, or what's your favorite candy bar, whatever it is. There's a list of things that people can use to build relationships right off the bat and build bonds. And that's one of the things that when people fill that out, when they start on their first day, that gets sent out to the company. So you can build connections and relationships right off the bat from day one. The amount of people that have come here have been surprised by the amount of either Slack messages or people that pass them in the hallway and say, hey, so glad you're here, is just strange to a lot of people. They're not really used to it. So back to Rihanna's comment of creating a place and a culture of belonging, I think it's so important to address that in your company values. You can add company values. You can take some away. You can adjust them. If they are what you and your leadership choose is important, shared value systems, that's really how an organization thinks, acts, and interacts. And we really care a lot about that at BambooHR and helping other organizations do that. Because if you start there, then people who have the same shared value systems of creating a place of belonging are going to be drawn to your organization. Doesn't matter what background you have. And from that cultural shift paradigm that she mentioned, this doesn't happen overnight, but if you start now, you can start putting some of these things together, and you'd be surprised at what happens maybe 6 months from now, 9 months from now. And the shift that can happen with people feeling like they really belong, or it doesn't matter who they are or what their background is. So to some of those points on onboarding, we actually have a new hire experience survey that we send out at the end of their first week, right? They're here, they have their job. Now tell us how you felt throughout the hiring process. We kind of do an inventory about their questions and the entirety, basically kind of a follow-up from that training I mentioned for hiring managers to make sure that we're doing what we hope we are doing there. So just doing a check and a test on your processes and systems will help a lot. We also, on our team, we know that our talent acquisition team often has, very early and strong bonds with candidates who then become employees. And so we do a new hire experience interview. It's a little bit more sporadic, but we want to make sure our team does that at least once a month with somebody that they've hired about 60 days ago, just to get a feel for how onboarding was over there. What can we do to help continually build a place of belonging and continually build and facilitate relationships there. So a lot of things, both in technology and in just taking time for thoughtfulness to go back and address some things in your organization, even some of the architectures of communications. I know it's been mentioned as well before about Slack channels and conversations. We have a workforce that's in many states as well at BambooHR, and we created an entire menu which people have access to, and we go over in their first day onboarding. An entire menu of Slack channels with shared interest groups, right? One that I think of is working moms, right? And people can go in there and chat about their own experience, maybe get advice from each other. But there are many, many shared interest areas that people can go into if they desire. And we even have geo areas where if there are other people from the Houston area all together, they can gather. And even though we don't have a physical office there, they can gather and again build relationships. And it's all about under the structure of belonging. So I'll point to two values that are really important at BambooHR that we talk about in our onboarding. So again, back to this idea of addressing an onboarding, we have 4 corporate onboardings that are throughout new employees' first month. And it's just once a week. We don't want to take too much time away from them getting to know their team and their job and feeling successful in that job. But at the same time, we choose to make the time. And one could look at the cost of these meetings and go, wow, that's an hour from 70 new people. That's quite a cost burden to the company. But what is the cost if we don't do that? And I don't think enough organizations are exploring that. What's the opportunity? How does it affect retention? We talk about our values, and we talk about a couple of them to highlight are being open is a value at BambooHR, and assuming the best. That we start by assuming the best about people's backgrounds, intentions, what they're here to do, and that we all just want to be successful in our jobs. So how do we help each other do that and do that well? That same idea with being open. Being open means being, honest and real and forthright. But it also means you're able to be open. You have a safe place to be open with your manager, with your coworkers, at the pace that makes sense for you. So it's more about creating that environment, and then how can you deliberately make sure that message is received and it's not just talk, right? How can it be consistently reinforced so that way people feel comfortable in the environment that you're actually trying to architect and build there. So
appreciate that, JD. Very insightful indeed. So we're down to our last question, and it's one of my favorite questions because this actually talks about execution rather than just education and advocacy, which a lot of people like to do. And then when you look under the hood, there's not always so much action. So I would love to hear, and I'm going to start with you, Stephanie, on any advice or ways that people can become intentional about implementing fair chance hiring in reference to a plan, or connect with local partners to find fair chance talent.
Yeah, I think number one is kind of what we're doing today, and that's just talk about the fact that you embrace fair chance hiring. Any chance I get, if I'm at an HR seminar or conference, just out somewhere, and I meet somebody who's like, oh, I work in HR or I'm a business leader, I talk about my volunteer experience and completely break down those myths that people with records are scary. The other thing is getting people out there to volunteer and working directly with the formerly incarcerated community. Once you start to meet people, you realize like, oh, this is a really good pool of people to be hiring from. And it really starts to remove all your preconceived notions about working with that group. I've been working, in this space with currently and formerly incarcerated people since the early 2000s. And it kind of paralleled my career in HR. And so it really changed my mind about how we hire people with records. The other thing is we're about to launch at Arcules a community service day where we're going to give everybody the day off to volunteer, and we're going to give them lots of different opportunities to go out there. So it won't be one, because our staff is very spread out. We'll help them figure out how to connect. Some of us that are already active volunteers can champion our causes to get people on board. And, for sure, I'll be out there talking about volunteer opportunities with California Coalition for Women Prisoners or other groups that support currently and formerly incarcerated people, especially mentoring them. I recently connected with an organization that's trying to train people that are recently released in how to code, and so that they become software engineers, because salaries are really good in this space. And that could be a huge stepping stone for people to rebuild their lives following release. And getting a good salary. We all know how important and how difficult that is right now in this era with, crazy gas prices and grocery prices and whatnot. And so if you can land a decent paying job, it puts that, jail time and prison time far, far in the past. And so really figuring out where are ways that I can help nudge my coworkers into volunteering with this community, because that'll help change their minds and get them really excited about helping to find pathways for folks to have a really good career, not just a job, but something that's going to be sustaining over time. So it's just really using our positions as HR and business leaders to help break down those barriers. What Rihanna said earlier about that, there's so much work put into prepping a job seeker, and I think that's important. But we are the ones, all of us on this call are the ones that really have to work to break down those barriers, because we have the institutional power to do that.
Appreciate that, Stephanie. Really, really like what you flagged about the sustainable living wage and talking about the pay. It's important, I think, for everyone to understand that the number one driver of mass incarceration and recidivism is poverty. And so when we can lift people up and give them access to economic mobility and livable wage, it's really, really important when we talk about careers and jobs and those types of things, rather than just thinking always at the baseline of entry level. So thank you for that. Rehana, I know that you have quite a bit to share about implementing fair chance and being intentional. Love for you to share some of that with the audience today.
Absolutely. And it sounds simple, but the best thing you can do is just start. When I started the program where we went from 0% fair chance talent to over 5 over the course of several years, it was literally a group of volunteers who did the first internship program. I'm still unclear how we got approval for that, but just go for it. It worked out. It was the right stepping stone. And we had so many fumbles along the way and so many lessons learned that all have been neatly packaged in Checkr's Fair Chance Playbook, which is freely accessible to everyone on this call, so you don't have to make the same mistakes. So even with that resource alone, you have probably 50% more information than I did when I started. Start with one team, one role, one quarter, one sourcing partner, and just do it. I promise you that there's not some huge scary thing that's going to happen or some massive failure that can occur. This really is something that you can start right now. While there are certain strategies that approach creating an entirely separate program within an organization for this talent pool, I advocate for making tweaks to your existing systems and fusing fair chance hiring into your diversity metrics, into increasing your pipeline, into looking for different ways to support upward economic mobility. Whatever you have going on, insert this talent pipeline into your efforts. And to do that, you can start both with looking at what tools and resources already exist out there, but also pick a sourcing partner to work with. And I think one sourcing partner that I think can kind of hit both having some tactical expertise and giving you a strong pipeline, as well as support what Stephanie was talking about, is DeFi. DeFi Ventures can actually bring you inside of prisons to meet people and do coaching and mentorship and mock interviews inside of prisons with people, so that you can, one, start doing that prep for folks and providing those types of services, but you also can start to break down your own barriers in your mind around what stigmas or biases you might have around this population. DeFi also has an external job readiness and sourcing arm for when folks get out. That's where we hired a lot of people when I was building my program. There's also a new organization called the Crop Organization based out of the Bay Area that's doing talent preparedness in San Francisco Bay Area and Los Angeles. And there are dozens and dozens, no matter where you are in the world. I saw that there are so many people from all over in this webinar, which is great. Just do a Google search. That's also what I did when I started a program in Denver. After the first program, is a search for community-based organizations that have this talent pipeline. Reach out, make connections. They will welcome you with open arms and a lot of warmth. And I think just getting started is the best thing to do.
Thanks for that, Rayhana. It's always executing that first hire that's the toughest, and that's the best approach. It's just like Nike said, just do it, right? JD, Tell us a little bit about your thoughts and Bamboo's approach to fair chance hiring, how you guys have approached it, and what are some of those results?
Well, again, I would say one of the most important things that we can do is again go back to the origins of the job descriptions and examine each one and do an audit and an inventory to say, what is absolutely vital for this background. What do we actually need to tear down and address with greater clarity? And I think that's the piece that has gone so well. If anybody looks at our job ads, you will see a certain inviting tone. That's part of our voice to try to invite more people, no matter what their background is. There's a general inviting tone, and there's also not a lot of very particular parameters in that regard. And again, how we look at who we screen out versus screen in, it's always looking at it from a pull perspective, right? How do we invite more people in to take a look at this? So I think that's one of the earliest, most important things that you can do is go back and do an audit of your jobs and try to tear down what is causing barriers to entry to your organization. And I'm sorry if that's a little bit more of a redundant statement based on the first, but I just consider it so vital. You have to work with different departments and different managers to help them get to that point where they can see the value of this. And again, Stephanie brought up retention metrics as well, and all of these other pieces that go into job descriptions, architectures, and if you start there, then everything just kind of follows afterwards over time. So statistically speaking, you'll find that more of your workforce has different backgrounds. More of your workforce actually has better problem solving. There's even a book called The Diversity Bonus, talking about different diverse backgrounds, problem solving, no matter what your fair chance background is. I highly recommend it. Even the formula was discussed by the author, Scott Page, who did a lot of research on this and said, actually, you have higher performing teams. Here's the math and formula behind it. And they're better at creative problem solving if you're able to get people of many different backgrounds and diverse backgrounds. So go to each particular job and tear down what you need to, and help managers recognize the opportunity in doing that.
Appreciate that, JD. Ashley, did you have anything to add? I know a lot's been said about the fair chance hiring. Any thoughts or building blocks you'd like to add to that?
I think it was well covered, but thank you.
I appreciate that, Ashley. All right, well, that's it for the panel questions today, and we're going to put up a poll question here for the audience that we'd like for them to answer. If you'd like more information about today's partners, please select all that apply. Yes to all partners, yes to Checkr, yes to BambooHR, yes to Process Street, or yes to the Overmorrow Group. I suggest you hit yes to all of those, and you'll be fully informed. We'll leave that up for just a minute, give people a chance to vote, and then we'll get into a little Q&A from the audience. Okay, thanks everybody for voting. We have a couple questions from the audience, and the first one is, how does employee development integrate into your processes to encourage fairness and diversity? Should organizations only invest in high potentials for leadership, or should they invest in every employee? That question comes from William Raw. Hopefully I'm not mispronouncing his name. And Rayan, I'll throw that question to you first, and then I'll go around the horn for everybody else.
Sure. And so I think if I'm understanding this correctly, thinking about sort of what I was alluding to earlier about, are folks ready to hit the ground running, or are we talking about an ability to ramp? And if I'm interpreting that correctly in terms of should you invest in employee development, yes, because we don't, especially when it comes to fair chance talent, we know that there have been systemic barriers to opportunity in place. And that's not just for fair chance talent, that's every type of marginalized group. So if there is an opportunity to come in, learn on the job, and increase and see what that yields, then we're never going to actually level equity wise in terms of equal access and equal opportunity to work, right? And so there, and that doesn't mean hire anyone. You have to have a sophisticated way of assessing ability to ramp. So something that we developed on my team was, how do you actually formulate an interview process that shows this person's ability to listen and correct within the interview process. So if someone, you ask them a question, they answer the question incorrectly, most interviewers are like, okay, well, points down, let's move on. But you can actually go back and say, so let's actually look at that question again. Here's what you gave me. Here's actually what I'm looking for. Could you give that another try? And if you see that learning and processing happening in real time, that's a very strong indicator that with some time, coaching, and determination, that you can actually develop into a top performer within 90 days, right? So you can think about it in that way. And I don't think that only looking for folks who are I guess, outwardly flagging high potential, because that also comes with a whole lot of cultural biases and contradictions and norms on who reads high potential in someone versus who doesn't. You're going to get a really limited talent pool. You're going to miss out on some really good folks, and you're probably going to hire some people that you regret later as well. So I think that it's a good process for everyone to have a sophisticated approach to that.
Thank you, Rayhana. Stephanie, I'm interested in hearing your response to the reskilling or upskilling question that was posed by William.
Yeah, and I think to build on what Rihanna said, I think we have to be looking at people that often get overlooked, that not just looking at people who have the degrees from the fanciest schools and have had access to the training and whatnot that will, kind of give them the tools to speak in the right way to get access to all those opportunities, is taking a chance on people that are often overlooked. I like this idea of using that interview session. If somebody kind of stumbles on an answer, kind of giving them a little coaching on it and giving them a second chance, because what you want to see is that they took that feedback and learned from it, because that's a really valuable tool to have, because they may be, check off 7 of the 10 boxes on the job description. And if they have that ability to take feedback and turn that around and learn, that means you're going to get them to the place where they have all those things. They may not have had access to all the training that has them enter, on their first day with that. And I also use that as an opportunity, like when I'm doing salary negotiations with a potential new hire, or if somebody says, when I said, what's your salary requirement? And they undersell themselves by like $20,000. I say, well, this is our range, because even if we don't hire them, I want to send that person away with that information of when they are interviewing for the next job, to understand what their value is. There's a very famous tweet that happened a couple months ago with a recruiter who said, if people undersell themselves, that's on them and that's their problem, and they should know to ask for more. I'm like, well, a lot of people don't know about that. And especially when I work with formerly incarcerated job seekers, they don't know that they can negotiate for pay. And so the more I can do to kind of give people those opportunities to, and give them those kind of mentoring conversations, I think we can find people that are often overlooked. And it leads to a more inclusive process, and make sure that, like, when you're developing your leadership programs at your company, that you're not just targeting the people that always get picked, but sometimes the people that were, picked last on the sports team or whatnot, that you're targeting them, because there's a lot of people there that have potential, and you can build some really solid leaders. And again, that's a good way to build your retention strategy as well, because if you find those people and give them the opportunities to grow, you're building a really loyal employee.
Appreciate that. Thank you for that, Stephanie. We have time for one more question if we make it quick, and I'm going to shoot this to JD. There's a question again from William that says, do any of you use assessments such as the predictive index in your hiring processes? And I'd love for you to go, and then give Ashley a chance to answer that if we can.
Sure. I'm always very leery of assessments that are not specifically skills based, right? Anything else pre-hire. There's actually documentaries put out on this, one on HBO about this and about the concerns. And even as you research the APA, American Psychological Institute or Association, the jury's out, as it were, like as to their effectiveness. But I do think there's a place after people are hired for people to understand each other, right? Some of these assessments that are strengths based. And I think it's a great way for people to understand how to work with each other sometimes, right? But I think each each type of assessment is different. You have to be really, really careful and cognizant about that, and how that might accidentally pigeonhole people, or put themselves, maybe they put themselves in a box. And one of the things I'd rather have people do, which is kind of what we were talking about before, in the early process of an employee's life cycle, how are you helping every individual build an identity of success? Because it's that confidence in doing their job well that very often people feel more comfortable being a leader, no matter what their background is. It's not introversion, extroversion. It's not, the ego that owns the room. It's what can you do to actually help empower people to be really successful, and then invite everyone. One of our values, again, is lead from where you are. Invite everyone to do some type of leadership area. Not everyone is going to love it. Some people are really going to love it. That's fine. But we're not taking time to really empower people to help them understand their strengths in the early part of the life cycle, in the first 90 days, and allow them to have really to build an identity of success, and that confidence builds with all of us. So I would be very leery of pre-hire assessments as a screening measure entirely, to be honest, because there's not enough backing on them as far as their validity. And aside from skills tests themselves, I'd be really careful about that.
Thank you for that, JD. Ashley, we have about 1 minute left. Do you want to add something about the assessments?
Sure. Just that we do not use them here. I've used them in previous roles that I was in at a different company, and kind of echoing what JD said, we didn't really find a ton of value add in them, other than making someone take an assessment that isn't particularly pertaining to the job that we're hiring them for. And so kind of superfluous, and decided to do away with them. But I did want to quickly give a shout out to Stephanie on her answer before about kind of giving that salary information to employees who are underselling themselves. I learned something new today, and I wanted to thank you for that. And also kind of living the value of, like what you said before, that you're not about the company, you're about the people. So I appreciate that.
Thanks, Ashley. All right, well, that about does it for us. But before we go, I'd like to tell everybody who's watching that this program is eligible for a SHRM credit, 1 hour of credit, using the code 22-4E36K. I want to thank everybody for joining today, and big ups to our panelists for sharing their time and expertise. It was well worth the watch. Watch your inbox for the replay and follow up items per your questions. And panelists, if you want to drop your information, if you haven't done so already, several people were asking about LinkedIn information and how they could get in contact with you to follow up. So we appreciate you. Everybody enjoy the rest of your week, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, everyone.